SystemsWiki Collaborate, loops. Within the Kumu context, a loop is one or more connections that have a label affixed to it. And the way that you add a loop is simply by clicking the plus sign down here and saying you want to add a loop. Or you can use the shortcut key of L to say you want to add a loop. When you say that when you select that, it says what's the label for the loop, and I'll call it my. Notice I added 2 spaces, so this will display on 2 lines. And then I have to select what it is that I want the loop to be defined as. So here I'm defining all 3 of these connections to be part of the loop, and then I go ahead and hit enter, and it creates me a label for this loop. So when I select this, it indicates that there's a profile page for the loop, as with every other entity, which has a title which you can edit. It has a type, and in the context of the Kumu projects for SystemsWiki, we have 6 different types of loops, and I'm not going to go into each one of them in detail here, though this video has a context link in the notes section, as all of the videos do, and it will take you to this point in SystemsWiki, and there are 2 connections to this, one on basic relationships and one on implications, and the implications project will give you a video and a link to a model that talks about all of those different types of loops in detail and explains them if you really want to get into it that deep. Basically, what we endeavor to understand is whether or not the loop is a balancing or a reinforcing loop. And the way that you determine that is to simply walk the loop and count the number of subtracts from / opposite connections that are in the loop. If it is 0 or even, it's a reinforcing loop, and if it is an odd number, then it's a balancing or goal-seeking loop. And we label the loops because of the way that we use, what are we using? We're using who can remember all this stuff? We're using the showcase feature to actually sequence the loops at the bottom, so we label them 01 R or B, 01, 02, 03, and either R or B, so there's a single sequence for all of the loops. What that gives us is actually a way to be able to walk through the sequence of the way that the loops actually unfold within the project, and you can turn these on multiple, or you can simply go from one to the next, so that there's 5, and there's 6, and there's 7, and 8, and that so that allows one to see the way that we think that the current project unfolds. And I'll do something to talk about showcase in a moment, but the primary aspect of this to understand is that we create loops to identify whether they're reinforcing, which is typically produces exponential growth, or whether it's a balancing loop, which is a goal-seeking structure, and that once the loop is created, one comes over and actually sets the type for it and can add a description of what the loop is intended to do. Now, later on, oftentimes, because the model is a set of chaos on an ongoing basis, and things are constantly changing, sometimes you have to edit the definition of a loop, so that suppose that this loop actually isn't here. I could move this connection someplace else. I could select this connection, and I could connect it, select it, move it, and I move it to here. This loop is still defined to be these connections. And the way I can tell that is if this is selected If I come over to the pencil, which says edit connections, it highlights them, and you can actually change the definition of a loop so that now that I save this, the loop is now only defined to be this single connection, which means it's not really a loop in a traditional sense, but it's the way that Kumu defines what is meant to be a loop. So let me go ahead and put these back in here and tell it to save it. So this is the loop. One of the nice things about loops is if you hold down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, you can actually move the entire loop at one time, as opposed to if it's not selected, you can move the loop label. It knows that this is a structure that you can manipulate together. Now, if you click this and hit delete, you delete the label, not the loop. You would have to select all the pieces one at a time, hold down the Shift key and select the whole thing if you wanted to delete it, which you could do, but you can get it back over here doing the undo, and I'm back to where I was. So a loop is a number of connections and their associated elements that go together for some reason, specifically in the context of developing relationship models, to identify those things which are reinforcing or balancing structures, because it is the feedback within those structures that tends to have the greatest influence over the behavior of that aspect of the model. So hope this tells. In the context, in the notes section of this video, there is a context link which will take you to this, it'll take you to this location in this structure, and there are additional things added connected to it in terms of a basic relationships project and an implications project, which will talk, the implications project talks about those individual models which talk about the different kinds of loops in a lot more detail. And I've also learned, which I should have expected, that the videos that I'm creating are not quite as complete as I would like them to be, so that in the notes section associated with this structure, with the individual elements, as things come up, I will add notes about things that I realized that I left out of the video, that this, for the connections one that I did previously, things that need to be added to the next video, how to change direction of a connection, how to add delay to a connection. I didn't talk about those in that particular video, but when I get it, when I redo it, I'll remember to add those pieces and probably forget something else. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Nothing is ever finished. So I hope this dabbling into loops adds a bit of clarity about loops. And in this particular project, there are lots of them, and we are continuing to add new ones, take them away, redefine them as we better understand this set of relationships. So see you in another video shortly. Bye.